Hello everyone and welcome to the test episode for Optimus News. Now, this is a brand new show format coming to the Optimus channel exclusively for Watch Optimus channel members. It'll be a daily news broadcast featuring breaking and developing world news from the typical Optimus perspective with a higher production quality and more features such as national weather forecasts and added sources. This episode is the test for the format and everything. We're just trying to see what we're kind of working with here. I wanted to make this episode public though so you guys can see some of the changes we're making to the channel. More about that will be coming September 30th at 1 p.m. Eastern time here on the channel. But anyway, enjoy the inaugural episode of Optimus News. Welcome everybody back to Optimus News. Today is September 26th, 2022, and first in today's news, today marks an incredible moment in NASA's Planetary defense test. The Double Asteroid Redirection Test, also known as DART, will slam into an asteroid approximately the size of a 50-story building. The asteroid Dimorphos will be struck by DART at 14,000 miles per hour in an effort to push the asteroid closer to Didymos, which is a larger companion space rock. If successful, the test will demonstrate the ability for NASA and other relevant space agencies to redirect a hazardous asteroid that could potentially collide with Earth, saving humanity from certain destruction and widespread catastrophe. Launched 10 months ago and traveling over 7 million miles, DART was designed to be observed by ground-based telescopes and planetary radar in order to utilize the kinetic impactor technique, a move where one or potentially more spacecraft are shot at a hazardous asteroid in an effort to collide with and redirect the orbit of the incoming asteroid. It's important to note that neither asteroid in this mission is hazardous to Earth, which is exactly why NASA selected the pair for this specific test. While it'll take days or weeks to know if the orbit is significantly changed by DART's impact, NASA expects impact to take place at 7:14 p.m. Eastern Time today, Monday, September 26th, 2022. And in other news, it's official. Tropical Storm Ian has become Hurricane Ian as it moves northward through the Caribbean towards the U.S. state of Florida. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis has issued a state of emergency for the entire state and urged residents to take the proper precaution ahead of landfall. CBS News meteorologist David Parkinson said early this morning that, quote, a certain amount of storm surge destruction in and around Tampa Bay was, quote, nearly baked in at this point. But officials say don't be fooled. Even if not in the direct path of the eye of the storm, there are still widespread effects the storm will have on the state, including hurricane-force winds and inches of rain being dumped. As the storm continues to approach, it is expected to continue to rapidly intensify in strength to become a major hurricane, potentially up to a Category 4 hurricane. Lines outside stores in Tampa Bay were long as some residents reported basic necessities were already bought out. Items such as bottled water have become hot commodities, and other supplies were going quickly in panicked shelf clearing. Hurricane Ian is expected to make landfall in Florida later this week, anticipated to be a major hurricane by the time it hits the state near Wednesday. Preparation and potential damage isn't limited to the United States, though, as Hurricane Ian is also projected to hit Jamaica and the Cayman Islands with 3 to 6 inches of rain and anywhere from 6 to 10 inches of rain for Cuba before making landfall in Florida. U.S. President Joe Biden has also declared an emergency in Florida federally, which allows FEMA and the Department of Homeland Security to provide and coordinate assistance and disaster relief to affected people. The president also postponed a September 27th trip to Florida as the storm is approaching. If you live in the path of Hurricane Ian or any projected path of Hurricane Ian, it is imperative that you begin preparing immediately as time is running out before landfall. Also in today's news, tragedy unfolds in Russia as a school in central Russia becomes the scene of a massacre. In the city of Izhevsk, at least 13 people are dead with at least 21 injured. As of recording, 7 of the fatalities are confirmed to be children. Claims from Russia's investigative committee suggest the gunman wore a black t-shirt with, quote, Nazi symbols, but have yet to identify the gunman. No details about the shooter or a potential motive have been released to the public, but the shooter is confirmed deceased after committing suicide after the attack. The school the shooting took place at is now cordoned off and evacuated as officials continue to investigate. As we learn more, we will update you on this story. And in Ukraine, residents claim Russian officials forced people to vote door by door in referendums at the end of a gun barrel. Claims have surfaced that in referendums Russia is holding in occupied territories, soldiers were forcing civilians to vote by the threat of shooting them. These fraudulent elections are being staged by Russia in Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson, and Zaporizhia and are almost certain to result in pro-Russian outcomes. These elections are not considered fair by any international definition and violate both Ukrainian and international laws in the process. These referendums vote on these occupied territories, joining the nation of Russia, and are almost guaranteed to be rigged elections in favor of joining Russia. Within 1 week, Russia announced these referendums, mobilized hundreds of thousands of soldiers, and then hosted these referendums, drawing much scrutiny globally and leading to an escalation of an already intense situation between them and the nation of Ukraine. Ukrainians in contact with people living in these regions reported men armed with Kalashnikov rifles and portable ballot boxes going door to door at apartment buildings and homes in these areas. On top of this, other reports suggest men also going to hospitals, schools, and even directly to workplaces to force other civilians to vote as well. After Russia has mobilized hundreds of thousands of new troops in the war against Ukraine, new videos have surfaced showing drunken soldiers, disobedience to commanders, and overall low morale. During the chaos, protests inside of Russia have broken out, resulting in 750 arrests on Saturday at anti-war demonstrations. Independent Russian outlets have released footage of police beating protesters and then dragging them to vans to finish arrests. Since mobilization, OVD-Info claims over 2,000 arrests have been made, most being forced into Russian military service as a punishment. And in Iran, protests have increased after days of nationwide unrest. Yesterday, a fifth member of an Iranian volunteer paramilitary group was killed during a clash with protesters, whom the government described as, quote, rioters and thugs. The protests were initially started after the death of Mahsa Amini, a 22-year-old Kurdish Iranian woman who the morality police detained on September 13th due to a violation of the national dress code. Over 1,200 arrests have been made in connection with the protests, according to Iranian state-backed news agency Tasman, who went on to cite a security official. 17 journalists have also been arrested, according to the Committee to Protect Journalists. The Iranian government now claims that they will enact widespread internet restriction across the nation in order to quell the protests, a common tactic used to suppress information about protests from being shared quickly online. The United States has responded by potentially loosening sanctions, allowing more people in Iran to then access the internet to get around and circumvent these new protections. According to state news IRNA, hundreds of thousands of Iranians then held pro-government rallies and counter-protests throughout many major cities to condemn the protesters against the Iranian state. The Iranian government claims that protesters caught will be dealt with, quote, decisively. The protests have shocked the world at a time where the Iranian government is under increased international pressure due to United States-led economic sanctions, being caught delivering drones to Russia for their war in Ukraine, and now the protests from within. The protests take many by surprise due to their feminist nature. Women have been socially suppressed in Iran for decades, and reports suggest the protests are widely being led by young people who've simply grown sick of the socio-economic state of the country and the harsh rules against women. And in global news, a looming economic disaster seems to continue to unfold as stock markets have been rattled, with leading markets such as the Dow Jones, S&P 500, and the Nasdaq each losing 1.5% on Friday. In just 1 year, the market has dropped more than 5,000 points, with 1,000 of those coming in the last week. According to UC Berkeley economist James Wilcox, quote, "It is very likely that we are going to have a recession, and the probability of that occurring has been rising all year, really, and especially since the summer, with the Fed being so aggressive about raising interest rates." This is in reference to 2022 interest rate hikes by the US Federal Reserve, which makes borrowing for companies that are trying to grow much harder and also negatively impacts consumers, especially ones trying to buy a house. White House Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre was quoted on Friday as saying, quote, "That is why Democrats in Congress passed the Inflation Reduction Act. By the way, no Republicans supported that." This follows the White House pointing to lower gas prices and the strong job market, noting unemployment is only at 3.7%. However, an economic recession would not only affect the American market but the global market as well. Current Federal Reserve interest rate hikes are being used as a primary method of combating rising inflation, but are a sign many are pointing to now as a recession indicator. An inverted yield curve, meaning short-term yields fall below long-term returns, has basically been in effect since July and has only gotten worse, with more Fed rate hikes, which might happen again as soon as November if the Federal Reserve decides to hike interest rates once more. However, investors already globally clearly see the blood in the water in terms of a recession, as massive sell-offs in the stock market have damaged retirements of millions of people and wiped countless dollars off the market value of the largest companies in the world. Many indicators suggest the worst is yet to come and people globally should be preparing for a weaker market ahead. Now in other news, President Biden's national security advisor said on Sunday the United States directly warned Russia of, quote, catastrophic consequences if Russia were to use nuclear weapons in Ukraine. Worry globally has increased that Vladimir Putin could potentially resort to nuclear warfare against Ukraine as Russia struggles to hold territory it captured. They claim the United States, quote, spelled out the global reaction without directly elaborating on whether or not this would mean economic, military, or diplomatic consequences. President Vladimir Putin issued a stark warning last week that has mostly been taken as a direct mention of nuclear warfare, adding that, quote, this is not a bluff, and he will, quote, use all weaponry available to him. As the conflict in Ukraine becomes increasingly chaotic and deadly, tensions between the West and Russia continue to flare. The United States claims it is preparing for all contingencies, meaning the United States is openly saying they'll be ready for anything to happen and will respond forcefully in its own way to any use of nuclear weapons, whether tactical or freely used. As it stands, Russia does appear to be bluffing, as American officials claim there hasn't been any significant movement in Russia's 2,000 tactical weapons, indicating the nation wasn't preparing any imminent nuclear strike. As Ukraine continues to fight the Russian invaders inside of their country, the situation is extremely fluid and can change within a matter of hours. We will continue to provide you updates on the Ukraine war on a daily basis. And to wrap today's show up, Apple has announced today that the iPhone 14 will be produced in India in a move some already predicted. Many manufacturers and companies have been deciding in recent months to shift business interests away from China and to other competing markets in the region due to geopolitical tensions between the West and China growing, as well as disrupted global supply chains that continue to be jammed. India is the world's second largest smartphone market after China, yet Apple has notably struggled to enter and position themselves in the Indian market, which widely prefers the cheaper competitor smartphones currently available on the market. Apple hasn't just began manufacturing in India, however, as in 2017, Apple began producing its iPhone SE in the nation. Analysts have been speculating what's next after a JP Morgan report indicated that Apple could be producing a quarter of all of its products in India by 2025. A relatively short time frame to make such a major change in manufacturing. Apple first began looking elsewhere from China in 2020 as COVID-19 restrictions continually create lockdowns that disrupt Apple production. News reports indicate Apple plans to move tablet computer and wireless earphone manufacturing to Vietnam. Analysts now also are wondering if a manufacturing move to India could spell lower prices in India, theoretically also helping Apple compete more in one of the world's largest consumer markets. That's all for Optimus News today. Thank you guys for tuning in, and until our next episode tomorrow, this is Optimus, giving you the updates you need for the day, and signing out.